$50,000. Unless an agreement is reached today, a vote on whether to proceed to that measure would not occur until tomorrow. From 12:30 to 2:15 today, the Chamber will recess for their weekly party lunches, as they do most weeks. And now live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty God, awe and wonder grip us when we reflect upon your majesty. You are the source of our strength and provide our hope for years to come. Guide our senators today. May they seek your marching orders and have the courage to follow the cadence of your drumbeat. Give them the courage to act as well as to think, to do as well as to talk, and to accomplish your will on earth in all their work. Lead them, O God, to think with clarity, to love with honor, and to see the stamp of your image in all your creation. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 24, 2012. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I now move to proceed to count number 467, S3412, which is the Middle Class Tax Cut Act of 2012.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 467, S3412, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to provide tax relief to middle-class families.
Mr. President, the first hour this morning will be divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees. The majority controls the first half, Republicans the final half. The Senate will recess from 12:30 to 2:15 p.m. today for our weekly caucus meetings. At 3:40 this afternoon, there will be a moment of silence in memory of Officer Jacob J. Chestnut and Detective John Gibson of the United States Capitol Police, who were killed 14 years ago today in the line of duty defending this Capitol, the people who work here and the visitors, against an armed intruder. Yesterday, I filed cloture on the motion to proceed to the Middle Class Tax Act. If no agreement is reached, that vote will be tomorrow. I understand that S3420 is at the desk and is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S3420, a bill to permanently extend the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts to provide for permanent alternative minimum tax relief and to repeal the estate and generation skipping transfer taxes and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I object to any further proceedings with respect to this legislation at this time.
The objection having been heard, the measure will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, Republicans claim to share our commitment, Democrats' commitment to keeping taxes low for the middle class. So it's very strange that if that's what they believe, they've repeatedly blocked votes on our proposal to cut taxes for 98% of American families. 2 weeks ago, Republicans seemed eager to have those votes. That's what the Republican leader talked about here on the floor. They wanted to vote on our proposal to cut taxes for families making less than $250,000 a year, or 98% of Americans. and they wanted to vote on their competing proposal, which would actually raise taxes for 25 million families while handing out more tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. Democrats have tried to give the Republicans what they wanted. We've offered to skip the usual procedural delays and hold up or down majority votes on both proposals. So far, they've refused. But, Mr. President, the offer still stands. They want to vote on theirs, vote on ours, we'll do it with simple majority. So I hope Republicans don't insist on doing this the hard way. And why are Republicans delaying votes that they asked for in the first place? They know a majority of senators and a majority of Americans support our plan to help middle-class families. Our plan gives 114 million taxpayers, again 98% of American families, certainty their taxes won't go up. And it reduces the deficit by almost $1 trillion by ending wasteful tax breaks for the rich. Senate Republicans, their proposal takes a very different approach, and that's an understatement. It extends tax breaks for the top 2% of Americans, but it fails to extend tax cuts that help middle-class families. Their plan would hike taxes by another $1,000 for middle-class families while handing out an extra $160,000 tax break to every millionaire. Democrats will simply never agree we should hand out more tax breaks to the richest 2% of Americans while this economy is in the situation it's now in. But that shouldn't stop us from protecting the other 98% of Americans, and do it today. Mr. President, another subject, one that's extremely important. I've had a number of briefings lately from people in the administration. We've had them in a classified facility here in the Capitol about cybersecurity. Over the last few days, some of my Republican colleagues have suggested the Senate should delay action on what national security experts have called the most pressing threat facing this country. Instead of considering bipartisan cybersecurity legislation, they say we should first consider the annual defense authorization bill. I argue we need to move rapidly to address a gaping hole in our defenses against cyber attack. The director of the FBI, Robert Mueller, said that cyber threats will soon overtake terrorism as the most significant threat to our national security. And in the minds of some, Mr. President, it's difficult to separate cybersecurity and what people are trying to do and have tried to do every day. It's the same as terrorism. It's just a different form. A bipartisan group of national security experts led by former Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff, by the way a Republican, and former Director of National Intelligence Mike McConnell, who was appointed during a Republican administration, said cyber threats, quote, represents one of the most serious challenges to our national security since the onset of the nuclear age. That's a direct quote. The ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Senator McCain, said, quote, we must act now and quickly develop and pass comprehensive legislation to protect our electric grid, air traffic control system, water supply, financial networks, and defense systems, and much more from cyber attack. That's a direct quote from John McCain. And he's right. We need to protect our electric grid. Mr. President, you participated. We had over in our classified room, we had a demonstration of how cybersecurity would work, taking down your state, northeast part of this country. And they would do it so they could do it relatively easily, and it would take weeks and weeks to get it back up. We all watched that. What John McCain said is really true. We must pass comprehensive legislation to protect our electric grid, our air traffic control system, water supply, financial networks, and defense systems, and much more. Any one of these things would be devastating to our country if a cyber attack was successful. Now, John McCain suggested this a matter of months ago, almost a year ago, but the threat has only grown worse in that time. And failing to act on cybersecurity legislation not only puts our national security at risk, it recklessly endangers members of our armed forces and their missions around the world. Service members themselves have been repeatedly targeted by cyber attackers. In one hack last year, more than 90,000 military email addresses and passwords were stolen, and another hack of the TRICARE system. 4.9 million medical records from our military were stolen. If we're serious about protecting our troops, we must protect them against cyber attacks. But acting to secure our critical networks doesn't mean we won't do other things to help the defense industry, of course. There are some specific concerns about the Defense Authorization Bill, and I've talked about them. We can't allow the defense bill to become an end around the Bipartisan Budget Control Act. It's been so important to this country. And if we're going to debate the defense bill, House and Senate Republicans need to make it clear that they're willing to abide by the budget levels set by the law that they all voted for, with rare exception. And we must also ensure that the defense bill is not used as a platform to advance irrelevant partisan agendas. Mr. President, I want to take just a minute and talk about Agent Gibson and Officer Chestnut. It's been 14 years ago, and it's really hard to comprehend it's been that long ago. Officer Chestnut I knew by saying hello, but we had an event in Virginia where my wife became ill. And I'll never forget Agent Gibson running from the headquarters where the Capitol Police was based and administering aid to my wife. That was Agent Gibson. I remember that so clearly. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. I knew him so, I felt I knew him so well because of his helping Landra. Last week, this nation was reminded how fragile life is with what happened in Colorado and how quickly it can be taken away at random, as we learned in Colorado. Senseless acts of violence. So 14 years ago, the Capitol community was similarly reminded that we must never take life for granted. On this day, in 1998, two dedicated United States Capitol Police officers, Special Agent John Gibson and Officer Jacob Chestnut, gave their lives while protecting this building and the people in it. And their lives were not spent in vain, Mr. President. As a result of their sacrifice, we now have a Capitol that's much safer than it ever was. It was a result of their having been killed that we were able to finally get the Visitor Center done. We were able to get it done. We speeded that up. Now we have people coming into this Capitol. They are safe in the building. Their security is as good as it is any place in the world. It's a much more pleasant visit now coming to the Capitol. So their lives were not given in vain. While guarding the Capitol, Agent Gibson and Officer Chestnut were shot to death by really a madman. No other way to explain it. With the facilities we have now, that would not happen. And while nothing can erase the pain of losing a loved one, I hope their families take some measure of comfort knowing Agent Gibson, Officer Chestnut are not forgotten. Even 14 years later, those of us who work here in the Capitol, and Mr. President, just as a side note, I take special pride in the fact that I was a Capitol policeman. I worked in this building. I carried a pistol. I worked the swing shift, as we called it, from about 3 to 11 when I was going to law school. So every year that we give this special recognition to this occurrence having happened, I think of my days here and what a different place it was. Of course, there were things that we had to look out for, but, Mr. President, as I've said before, the most dangerous thing I had to do was direct traffic. But that isn't the way it is now with these men and women who take care of us here in the Capitol. Not just the senators, not just the staff, but all the millions of people that visit this facility every year. So I honor their service and their sacrifice. And of course, I'm forced to think back on really the days of my youth when I was walking around this facility, mostly at nighttime, a lot of times quite lonely. But this big building, you know, for someone that came from where I came from to be walking in these halls and most of the time at night alone, I have to reflect back on that. So we're grateful for the brave men and women who safeguard the People's House. They do it today, they do it every day. We take them for granted, we shouldn't. They're really gallant in the work they do. Capitol Police is a wonderful, wonderful organization, and I'm proud of it. Every member of the Senate is, and everyone in the country should be aware of the work they do to make this building safe.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
I'd like to start this morning by remembering another deadly shooting, one that hit very close to home for most of us. It was 14 years ago today that Officer Jacob Chestnut and Detective John Gibson of the Capitol Police were shot dead in the line of duty right here in the Capitol by a lone gunman. Their deaths serve as yet another reminder not only of the reality of evil, but of the precious gift of life. And so today we honor them for their lives and the final act of heroism that ended them. A plaque inside the Capitol commemorates their sacrifice, and the Capitol Police Headquarters now bears their names. But it's appropriate that we also pause in the midst of our other duties to honor these men and every member of the Capitol Police Force who work so hard to ensure our safety. Officer Chestnut was a 20-year veteran of the Air Force and had 18 years of service to the Capitol Police. Detective Gibson also had 18 years of Capitol Police service and until the day he died had never drawn his weapon. Both men left behind wives, children, and friends. Today, the Senate honors both of these good men once again and all of those they left behind. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, as the Senate resumes its work this week, Americans are hungry for leadership. The national debt hovers around $16 trillion. The federal government is on track to spend $1 trillion more than it takes in for the fourth year in a row. And Democrats haven't done so much as pass a budget in nearly 4 years. President Obama, meanwhile, isn't even talking with us about what to do about any of these things. The taxpayers are basically paying him $400,000 a year to hold campaign rallies and show up at fundraisers. His latest proposal on taxes has more to do with helping his campaign than in reviving the economy. And if you want proof, just ask yourself why Democrats don't want to vote on it. Republicans will head into tomorrow's vote guided by a simple principle: do no harm. In our view, the best approach to taxes right now is to let every American and every American business know they won't have a higher income tax bill at the end of the year. We think everybody in America should have that certainty. The Democrat guiding principle, to the extent that they have one, is quite different. To them, the goal isn't so much relief for struggling Americans or reviving the economy, it's sending a message. And their message is that some people deserve relief and some people don't. And they'll decide who those people are, regardless of the effect it has on the broader economy or on jobs. It's an approach that isn't based on any economic outcome, but on ideology. And Americans are really quite tired of it because it's been a disaster for our economy. Think about it.
If Democrats cared more about helping folks and reviving the economy, then they wouldn't be calling for a tax hike. Yet throughout this entire debate, Democrats haven't offered a single credible argument about how their tax increase targeted at job creators will help struggling middle-class Americans. Surely they didn't think this tax increase is the fiscally responsible thing to do. After all, even if they got it, let's assume they got this tax increase. It would only generate enough money to fund the government for 5 days. If they got the tax increase they want, it would only generate enough money to fund the government for 5 days. The larger point is this. The Senate should be in the business of actually making a difference rather than just making political statements. And that's why we think we should have a vote on all 3 proposals tomorrow. The President's proposal, the Senate Democrat proposal, and ours. Show the American people what's really behind their proposals and what we all stand for. If the Democrats believe the President's rhetoric, they'll vote for his proposal, and he'll work to get their support. Now, my guess is that Democratic leaders won't allow a vote on the President's plan. And that should tell you everything you need to know about the Democratic approach to the problems we face. They're either out of ideas, not serious about solving the problems we face, or both. To them, this is more about messaging or passing the buck than it is about helping anybody or preventing an economic calamity at the end of this year. The President's proposed a plan he thinks will help him on the campaign trail. Now, Democrats propose a plan they think helps them here in the Senate. What about a plan that actually helps the American people? It's all politics and positioning to our friends on the other side of the aisle at this point. And it's really quite disgraceful. The time to act on the problems we face is right now. The fiscal cliff draws closer with each passing day. And I think most people think the party in power has some responsibility to do something about it. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
2. Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the following hour will be equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders and their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota.
Mr. President, before I talk about the matter at hand, I would like to remember Officer Chestnut and Officer Gibson. I did not have a chance to know Officer Gibson. I did have a chance to know J.J., and he was somebody that lit up a room, had a 1,000-watt smile, and I'll never forget one early morning coming. I was going to a meeting in the House of Representatives. I wasn't familiar with where the room was, and J.J. took me right to it. And a delightful man. And it was tragic that his life was taken. I'll never forget the funeral. It was one of the most remarkable outpourings I've ever seen. And so we remember with enormous respect Officers Chestnut and Officer Gibson. Mr. President, I come to the floor this morning. First of all, I've got to respond to the Republican leader. What a fountain of misinformation. What a fountain of misinformation. He repeats this canard that no budget action has been taken here for 4 years. Well, what about the Budget Control Act that was passed last year with more than 70 votes here in the United States Senate? That was passed instead of a budget resolution. It was a law. Anybody that's had even a little bit of civics knows that a law is stronger than a resolution. And indeed, that law cut spending by $900 billion over 10 years and put in place this sequester that we now face that cut another $1.2 trillion over 10 years for a total spending cut of over $2 trillion, the biggest spending cut in the history of the United States, and the Republican leader acts as though he never heard of it. It never happened. Now let's get real. We took action in the House and the Senate, and it was signed into law by the President. Mr. President, the last time our friends on the other side were in charge, their policies brought us to the brink of financial collapse. Have we forgotten the economy was shrinking at a rate of 9% in the last quarter of the previous administration? And in their last month in office, we lost 800,000 jobs in 1 month? That was their record. This administration has turned things around. We're no longer losing jobs, we're gaining them. We're no longer shrinking in the economy, it's growing. Not as strong as we would like, but a remarkable turnaround after the other side and their policies led us to the brink of financial collapse. Now, Mr. President, let's talk about the legislation before us. It assures 98% of the American people they're not going to have a tax increase. Extends expiring provisions on income taxes and income tax relief for everyone below $250,000 a year. It includes incentives to promote work and support families. And it provides relief from the individual alternative minimum tax for 1 year, a tax that is increasingly affecting the middle class. Now, our friends on the other side say, whoa, wait a minute, that means you're going to have on those over $250,000 a top rate of 39.6%. That's true. What happened the last time we had a top rate of 39.6%? That was during the Clinton administration. What was the economic record then? 39 straight quarters of economic growth from 1991 until 2000, the longest period of uninterrupted growth in this nation's history. 24 million jobs created. That's what happened the last time we had a top rate of 39.6%. Mr. President, why is it important that we begin doing something about these growing deficits and debt? Because we are on an unsustainable course. This is one place where the Republican leader and I would agree. We are on an unsustainable course. We have been since the previous administration. Have they forgotten? They tripled the debt during that administration, tripled foreign holdings of U.S. debt, doubled the debt. Mr. President, we are on an unsustainable course. We are headed for a debt 200% of our GDP if we don't act. And this is a spending and a revenue problem. This chart shows clearly spending over the last 60 years is the red line. The green line is revenue. As you can see, we are at or near a 60-year high in spending. We are at or near a 60-year low on revenue. It's true we've got a spending problem. It is also true we have a revenue problem. Revenue at or near a 60-year low. And our friends on the other side, well, let's just have the historic average for revenue. And the problem with that, Mr. President, it's not a useful benchmark. This is spending going back to 1972, the red line, 40 years. The green line is the historic average for revenue. You can see if we just had the historic average for revenue, we never would have balanced the budget in a single year over 40 years. But that's what the other side wants to do. Mr. President, the fact is the 5 times we've balanced the budget since 1969, in 42 years, the 5 times we balanced the budget, revenue was nearly 20% of GDP. 19.7% in 1969, 19.9% in 1998, 19.8% in 1999, 20.6% in 2000, 19.5% in 2001. Mr. President, facts are stubborn things. Former Republican Budget Committee Chairman Judd Gregg said this about revenue: we also know revenues are going to have to go up if you're going to maintain a stable economy and a productive economy, because of the simple fact you're going to have this huge generation that has to be paid for. It's the baby boom generation. And that's not a forecast, that's not a projection. They've been born, they're alive today, and they are going to be eligible for Medicare and Social Security. Mr. President, in 2010, we saw some wealthy people paying no federal income tax, none. People with incomes of $500,000 to $1 million in 2010, 14,000 paid nothing, zero. Those earning over $1 million in 2010 that paid nothing were 4,000. Is that fair? Is that fair? It's outrageous. 4,000 people earning over $1 million paid absolutely nothing. 14,000 between $500,000 and $1 million of income paid absolutely nothing. And our friends want to defend that system? Shocking. Mr. President, here's what's happening to so-called tax expenditures. We are now spending more money through the tax code than through all of the appropriated accounts. And who are the big winners? Well, the top 1% in income, on average, get a benefit of $255,000 a year by the so-called credits, deductions, exclusions, preferences that are shot through the tax code. Mr. President, we have a little 5-story building in the Cayman Islands that claims to be home to 18,000 companies. They all say they're doing business out of that little 5-story building. Are they doing business out of that little building? Or are they doing monkey business out of that building? 18,000 companies in a little 5-story building in the Cayman Islands evading and avoiding the taxes due in the United States. Our friends on the other side say, no change. Shouldn't touch that. Really? That's fair? I don't think so. Mr. President, let's get real. Let's get serious. Let's take on deficits and debt. Let's make certain that everybody has a chance to contribute, even those who are at the top rungs who are now paying nothing. I thank the Chair and yield the floor.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I thank my colleague from North Dakota, Senator Kent Conrad, who's chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. And unfortunately for the Senate, for this country, he's retiring because he has brought to this chamber and to the national debate on our deficits an insight and knowledge of the subject that is unequaled. He has become a close and dear friend of mine, even closer over the last couple of years while we labored shoulder to shoulder in the Simpson-Bowles Deficit Commission and in efforts afterwards, bipartisan efforts in the Senate to deal with the deficit. I am disappointed and somewhat troubled by the argument made from many in this chamber that the deficit is the most serious problem facing America, and then in the same breath they call for extending tax cuts to the wealthiest people in this country. What we are proposing is a tax cut for those making up to $250,000 in income. That will certainly include all of the middle class and working families across America. The taxes will be higher for those in 2% of the highest income categories. And I think it's fair. I think those who have done so well and have been so fortunate in this great nation should be willing to pay their fair share of taxes. I support the middle-class tax cut the President's proposed. We want to bring it to the floor for a vote. I support it with the notion that we still have to keep our focus on the economy and creating jobs, number one, and deficit reduction and debt reduction, number two. We can do both. We've got to take care that whatever we do to the tax code does not jeopardize our economic recovery. We are on a positive path, 28 straight months of job creation in the private sector. We want to continue it. But we also need to change a reality, the reality that we borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend in Washington. That is unfortunate, unsustainable. We've got to make sure that the working families across America who continue to fall further and further behind each year and live paycheck to paycheck will have a helping hand from our tax code. That is known as progressive taxation. I think it's fair. Those of us in higher income categories should pay more. Those who are struggling paycheck to paycheck, trying to care for their children, they need a helping hand in the tax code. That is not only just and fair, it is good for the economy. Those in lower incomes are going to spend their money and do it in a fashion that invigorates the economy with the production of more goods and services. The Republican plan that calls for tax cuts even for the highest income categories, as Senator Conrad just noted, means a tax break of $250,000 for millionaires across America. I'm sorry, the people who are making $20,000 a week, that's what a millionaire would make in the course of a year, $20,000 a week, do not need that tax break. They haven't asked for it, they don't need it, and they should be contributing toward reducing this deficit and saving America from deeper cuts in Medicare and education and other expenditures that are critical to so many American families. According to a recent analysis, the Republican plan would actually end up raising taxes on working families. If you give a tax break to those who are at the highest level of income categories and still go after deficit reduction, then the working class families actually would have to pay more. I asked a number of my constituents to respond to this notion about cutting off the tax cuts at $250,000 in income, and several of them responded. Mary from Rockford, Illinois said this: I oppose any extension of tax cuts for the top 2%. I'm the mother of a developmentally disabled adult. I've seen more and more budget cuts each year for 30 years for the special needs population. However, for the 30 years we've been involved with this trickle-down theory, there have been no conclusive reports showing that that theory is working. John's a veteran from Plainfield, and he writes, we fully agree with the President. The rich should pay a little more for their fair share. We, the middle class, are fading away. We've worked most of our lives only to witness corporations take over and fraud in the financial markets. Jennifer from Chicago writes, I am appalled that Congress would consider cutting food stamps and other vital services for poor people and their families while maintaining tax breaks for those in the upper 2% of income. Wealthy people can afford to live on a little less. Poor children cannot afford to do without food and shelter. So, when we talk about tax policy and debt reduction, let's do it sensibly. Let's help working families. Let's fix the tax code in a way that gives them a fighting chance. Let's ask the upper 2%, the top 2% of wage earners to pay their fair share. It is not unreasonable. Everyone must be prepared to make some sacrifice. Let's make certain that working families are protected in this debate. Mr. President, I note Senator Murray was coming to the floor to speak on this tax issue, but she has been delayed, and I would like to ask consent that she be recognized to speak after I finish my remarks.
Without objection.
And I also ask for consent that if I go over the allotted time in morning business for the majority, that I be given an additional, and Senator Murray be given an additional period of time and a like amount of time be offered to the Republican side.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask that this statement that I'm about to make be placed in a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it was 11 years ago that I introduced a bill called the DREAM Act, a piece of legislation that would give a select group of immigrant students who grew up in this country the chance to earn their citizenship if they were of good moral character and if they're prepared to serve in the military or complete at least 2 years of college. The young people who would be eligible for the DREAM Act came to be known as the Dreamers. These are young people brought to the United States as children and infants. They grew up in this country overcoming great obstacles. They will be our future doctors, our engineers, our teachers, our lawyers, our soldiers. They will make America a better nation. They didn't make the decision originally to come to this country. It was a decision made by their parents. And if their parents were breaking the law in that decision, I don't believe that the children should be held responsible. That's not the American way. Like the civil rights activists of past generations, the Dreamers are speaking out. They are telling their stories publicly, even though many of them know that they risk deportation from the only country they've ever known as home. They have organized rallies and marches where they advocate for the DREAM Act, and they've declared their undocumented status. They wear T-shirts and carry signs that bear their slogan, undocumented and unafraid. These Dreamers have been by my side every step of the way, fighting for the DREAM Act for 11 years, and I'm proud of them. In 2007, the first time the DREAM Act came to a vote on the floor of the Senate, there were a few Dreamers sitting right up in the gallery. We had 52 votes that day. It was a bipartisan majority. Frankly, we've always had a bipartisan majority, but we've never had the 60 votes we need to overcome the Republican filibuster against the DREAM Act. 3 years later, in December of 2010, the DREAM Act was again considered on the floor of the Senate. This time, it was different. The Senate gallery was filled to capacity with Dreamers wearing graduation gowns and caps. It was an inspiring sight. That day, 55 senators voted for the DREAM Act. Again, another bipartisan majority, but again, fell short of the 60 votes that we needed to defeat a Republican filibuster of the DREAM Act. Now, I made a commitment that day, after that vote was lost, to the young people who would be eligible for the DREAM Act that I wouldn't give up, that I'd keep on fighting for the DREAM Act as long as it takes to make it a law. Well, since that vote in December of 2010, I have come to the floor of the United States Senate to tell the Dreamers' stories. I think it's the best way for people to understand the DREAM Act. Today, I want to tell you about another Dreamer. Her name is Erica Andiola. Erica was brought to America from Mexico when she was 11 years old. She grew up in Arizona and enrolled at Arizona State University. But then Arizona passed a new law prohibiting public universities from giving financial aid or in-state tuition rates to undocumented students. Hundreds of students were forced to drop out of school. Erica persevered. She graduated with honors from Arizona State with a bachelor's degree in psychology. She's been very active in advocating for immigrants and the DREAM Act. She's the founding president of the Arizona DREAM Act Coalition. Her dream is to be a school counselor. The story I've just told of Erica Andiola is the 50th Dreamer whose story I've told on the Senate floor. It's an amazing group. It includes Dreamers who grew up in 17 different states, from Oregon and Washington in the Pacific Northwest, and I see my colleague Senator Murray on the floor, to Illinois and Michigan in the Midwest, to North Carolina and Georgia in the Southeast. These Dreamers came from all over the world to America, from 19 different countries, Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, and Central America. Yet all of them had something in common. Their home's America. They're just asking for a chance to give back to this great country. To mark the occasion of this, my 50th Dreamer story on the floor of the Senate, many of the Dreamers that I've featured on the floor have made a trip to Washington and have gathered in the gallery. They're here this morning, and I'd like to take a few minutes to recognize them. Let me start with the person who started the DREAM Act, Teresa Lee. Teresa was brought to the United States when she was 2 years old to the city of Chicago. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from the Manhattan Conservatory of Music, where she's currently pursuing her doctorate. The next person I'd like to refer to is Eric Balderas. Eric came to the United States from Mexico when he was 4 years old. He was valedictorian and student council president at his high school in San Antonio, Texas. He's now a student at Harvard University, where he's majoring in molecular and cellular biology. His dream is to become a cancer researcher. The next is Manuel Barch. Manuel came to this country from Germany. Turn this. Manuel came to this country from Germany when he was a child. He recently graduated from Heidelberg University in Ohio with a major in political science and a minor in history. and he wants to pursue a career in government and politics. The next is Kelsey Burke. Kelsey came here from Honduras when she was 10 years old. She graduated from Florida Atlantic University with a major in public communications. She'll begin law school this fall, and she dreams of becoming an attorney. The next is Julieta Garibay. Came to America when she was 11 years old. She graduated from the University of Texas with a bachelor's and master's degree in nursing, has been a registered nurse since 2004. She dreams of serving in our military as a military nurse. The next is Maria Gomez. Maria came to the United States from Mexico when she was 8 years old. Graduated from UCLA with a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's degree in architecture. She dreams someday of being a licensed architect in America. The next, Angelica Hernandez, came here when she was 9. Graduated from Arizona State University as the outstanding senior in the mechanical engineering department. Someday she wants to be a licensed engineer in the United States of America. The next is Ola Queso. I'll let Joe catch up with me here. Ola was brought to the United States from Albania at the age of 5. She is a pre-med student in the honors program at the University of Michigan. Her dream is to be a surgical oncologist. The next is Sahid Limon, brought to America from Bangladesh when he was 9 years old. He graduated from East Carolina University with a bachelor's degree in biology. The next, John Magdaleno. John came to the United States from Venezuela when he was 9 years old. He's an honors student at Georgia Tech University, where he's a biomedical engineering major. The next is Tolu Olabume. Tolu was brought to America from Nigeria at the age of 14. She obtained a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering 10 years ago. She has never worked a day as a chemical engineer because she can't be licensed. That's her dream, to be a licensed engineer. Here's Gabby Pacheco. Gabby came to the United States from Ecuador at the age of 7. She's earned 2 associate's degrees in education, now working on her bachelor's. She wants to teach autistic children. She has become an extraordinary leader in this movement. Pedro Pedroza is next. Came to the United States when he was 5 years old. Grew up in Chicago. Graduated from Cornell University with a BA in Spanish literature and a minor in Latino studies. His dream is to be a teacher. And now 2 brothers who are here in the gallery, Carlos and Rafael Robles. Carlos majoring in education at Loyola in Chicago. He dreams of being a teacher, and he may get his chance at Palatine High School. Rafael majoring in architecture at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Of course, he dreams of being a licensed architect. Next is Novi Roy. Came to America from India as a child. Novi graduated from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a bachelor's degree in economics, 2 master's degrees, 1 in business administration and 1 in human resources. His dream is to help provide affordable health care for all Americans. The next, Felipe Souza Rodriguez. Felipe came to the United States from Brazil when he was 14. He recently graduated summa cum laude from St. Thomas University with a bachelor's degree in business studies and a minor in economics. His ambition is to be a teacher. And the last is Cesar Vargas, another good friend who was brought to the U.S. when he was 5 years old, and he recently graduated from the City University of New York School of Law with honors. He dreams of one day serving in the Judge Advocate General Corps, of being in our military and serving the nation that he loves. I want to thank all the dreamers who are here today and have gathered in the gallery. They've come a long way. It took an extra effort for them to come to Washington and to step forward and to allow me to share their stories again with the people who followed this debate. Today I'm launching American Dreamers, a new website featuring the dreamers whose stories I've told on the floor of the Senate, including all of those who are here today. We're going to update this website as I tell more stories. You can find it at www.durbin.senate.gov/dreamers. This is a hopeful time for the dreamers. It's better than it's been in a long time, because this president and his administration recently announced that we will give the dreamers temporary legal status to be here in America. This status will allow them to live and work legally without fear of deportation. The status needs to be renewed every 2 years, but they get their chance. It gives these young immigrants an opportunity to come out of the shadows and be part of the only country they've ever called home. The Obama administration's new policy will make America a stronger and better nation by giving these dreamers a chance to be part of our future. This policy has strong bipartisan support in Congress. My special thanks to Senator Richard Lugar of Indiana, who joined me in co-sponsoring this bill and asking for this status on immigration years ago. It took extraordinary political courage for him to do that, and I thank him once again, as I have before. According to recent polls, the American people think the President's right in giving these dreamers a chance to earn their way toward legal status by a margin of almost 2 to 1. A future president could come along and change this policy, so the dreamers are still at risk, but they are prepared to step up, to follow the law, and to become part of America's future with permanent residency someday, and perhaps citizenship, which is our ultimate dream. The President's new policy is a step in the right direction, but ultimately it is Congress that must act, the House and the Senate, to pass the DREAM Act and give these young people who've gathered here today and thousands more just like them a path to citizenship in America. I want to give special thanks to Majority Leader Harry Reid. The last time we called the DREAM Act, he took a lot of grief for it. They said, oh, it's just a political thing. But it's not. He believes it, as so many of us do, and he was prepared to guide the Senate through a week-long debate to get to a vote. We didn't have enough votes to break the Republican filibuster, but we demonstrated again a bipartisan support for a sound, good idea for America's future. I also want to give special thanks to Joe Zogby, who's sitting on the floor here. Joe is an attorney on my staff who for 11 years now has battled side by side with me to pass the DREAM Act. And Vasily Yildandi, who on our staff as well, has just been terrific in helping us prepare these floor statements and to continue this battle forward. I said to the Dreamers the last time it was brought to the floor and we didn't have the votes, I'm not going to give up on you, don't give up on me. We're going to do this. I'm dedicated to them and to the fact that many of us who are the sons and daughters of immigrants, and frankly that includes almost all of us in this country, understand that the diversity of immigration has made America a stronger place. These DREAM students will prove once again, as generations have before, that given a chance, they will make America a better country. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to urge my colleagues to support the extension of tax cuts for 98% of workers and 97% of small business owners. Now, this should be a no-brainer. Democrats do not want taxes on our middle-class families to go up, and Republicans claim they want that too, and they also say they want these tax cuts extended. So, Mr. President, this should be easy. When 100 senators agree on a policy, we should be able to pass a bill. But unfortunately, Republicans are not focused on the 98% we agree on. They are preoccupied with the 2% that we don't. And they are prepared to take our country over the edge and into the new year in an effort to prevent millionaires and billionaires from paying a penny more in taxes. Republicans are so opposed to having the wealthiest pay the very same rate they were paying during the Clinton years that if they can't force through more tax cuts for the rich, they would prefer taxes to go up on middle-class families. They want 98% of workers to pay the price if millionaires are asked to pay a penny more. This is unbelievable and a deeply cynical position to take. It doesn't make any sense. Mr. President, we have a fundamental difference of opinion between the two parties about the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans that have added trillions of dollars to the deficit and debt. I'm not asking Republicans to set aside their values. It's clear they are deeply committed to putting more money into the pockets of the wealthy. All I'm saying is, all Democrats are saying is, we shouldn't let that disagreement on tax cuts for the rich cause taxes to go up for the middle class. We can certainly have a debate about the merits of extending tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. I'm confident Republicans are ready to stand here on the floor and make their case. I'm prepared to make mine. But I urge our Republican colleagues now to not play political games with the tax cuts that both sides believe should be extended. Because, Mr. President, holding these middle tax cuts hostage is bad policy, it is bad economics, and frankly, it is bad politics. Poll after poll show the American people support ending the tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. Republicans know they're in an unsustainable political position. They know they can't be seen as holding middle-class tax cuts hostage for more tax cuts for the rich. And last week we saw how they reacted when they got called on that reality, stomping their feet and shaking their fists, trying to muddy the water and change the subject. They do everything but admit it is time for compromise. You know, in fact, just this morning, the Republican senator from Pennsylvania gave a speech about his plan for even deeper tax cuts for the rich, down to just 28% for the wealthiest Americans. It's stunning. While Democrats are fighting for tax cuts for the middle class, Republicans are not only holding them hostage to continue the tax cuts for the rich, they're also scheming for ways to cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans even more. But their rhetoric is not going to fool the families and small business owners in America. You know, I recently heard from a constituent of mine. His name is Rob Robinson. He's from Walla Walla in my home state of Washington. Rob owns a small construction company. He just finished work on the local police department, and he said to me, and I quote, "I've been a small business owner for over 25 years, and it is outrageous to me that some members of Congress would hold up middle-class tax cuts for the sake of protecting the wealthy from paying their fair share." And he went on. He said, "The fact that they justify cutting taxes for the wealthy by invoking the name of small businesses tells me they are simply out of touch with the economic reality of the majority of small business owners in the country." I heard from another small business owner. His name's Alan Willis. He is from Kennewick, Washington. Alan opened up his small business, Tri-City Music, in 2008. And he wrote to me saying, and I quote, "I'm like a lot of Main Street small business owners. I open the shop in the morning, I close it down at night, I vacuum the carpets, I clean the bathrooms. I strive to provide my customers with an incredible level of customer service after the sale. I work hard, and I'm blessed that I make enough to pay my fair share of taxes." Alan told me, when Republicans hide behind the name of small business to support their agenda for lower tax cuts for the rich, they don't speak for me. Let's call it what it is, political identity theft. They are stealing the name of small business as a smokescreen for tax policy that benefits millionaires. That is a quote from Alan. Mr. President, I also heard from a constituent of mine named Dallas Baker. Dallas is a Seattle firefighter. He's been on the job for 15 years. He told me he loves serving his community and making a difference. But he said, and I quote, "My daughters and I are all making sacrifices now. We are comfortable, but we are losing ground. And if taxes went up for middle-class families like his, it would only get harder." Mr. President, Rob and Alan and Dallas are among the 98% of workers and 97% of small business owners the Democrats' bill would extend our tax cuts for. Those are the people I'm fighting for, them and millions across America. Middle-class families who have been struggling, who have sacrificed so much, who shouldn't see their taxes go up. But, Mr. President, my Republican colleagues don't seem to be focused on people like Rob and Alan and Douglas. They are much more concerned about the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, many of whom happen to be their biggest campaign and super PAC donors. They may claim to be here talking for small business owners, but they aren't speaking for the small business owners I hear from, not small business owners like Rob and Alan, or the 97% who Democrats are here fighting for tax cuts for. Fighting for people like Joseph Kraft. He's a coal industry billionaire. Mr. Kraft is worth an estimated $1.4 billion, according to Forbes, and Republicans are fighting to cut his taxes. They're fighting for people like Harold Simmons. He made his billion on corporate buyouts. Harold is worth an estimated $9 billion, and Republicans are fighting to cut his taxes too. And they're fighting for people like Harold Hamm. He's an oil and gas billionaire. He's worth an estimated $11 billion. And Republicans are doing everything they can to make sure their taxes don't go up a penny. Mr. President, the vote on the middle-class tax cut extension is going to be very illuminating. It's going to highlight some stark contrasts and give American people a clear view into the priorities of our two parties. Democrats are here focused on middle class. We want to extend the tax cuts for 98% of our workers and 97% of small business owners, people like Rob and Alan and Dallas and millions more. But if Republicans do not vote for our tax cut bill, it will demonstrate clearly they don't care about certainty, they don't care about the economy, and they certainly don't care about the middle class. Rather, they care about extending those tax cuts for the rich above all else, and we use every bit of leverage they have to do it, and they're prepared to let taxes go up on every family if they don't get their way. So, Mr. President, I hope they change their tune. They say inaction is not an option. Well, here's their chance to act for 98% of workers and 97% of small business owners. All they have to do is stop playing games and stand with us to pass our bill this week. And if they do, I would be happy to have an honest debate about extending the Bush tax cuts for the rich that they're so passionate about. If they don't, and taxes go up on every American because Republicans insist on protecting and extending the Bush tax cuts for these guys, then they're going to have to explain that to Rob and Alan and Dallas and millions of families and business owners just like them. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I ask consent to enter into a colloquy with my Republican colleagues.
Without